Welcome to Raw Painting. In our Raw video series, we just paint miniatures from start to finish and very light editing, just so you can see the process and hear some of the discussions we have about miniature painting. In this series, we focus primarily on larger miniatures so that you can see more detail and get more insight into some of the miniature paintings that we do. But enough talking, let's jump into it. All right, we are going to be painting Blightfang, Reaper's White Dragon. So I have out here my regular sable hair brush. However, I'm not going to be using that, but I wanted to start the video with it. Because I'm just starting with a base coat, I'm going to be using a much bigger brush and just laying on plenty of color with that. Now, this is of course going directly to YouTube, and we may change it up a little bit. Before, when we were painting our frost giant, we were not doing any editing, we were just recording and playing. However, I apologize, however for this one we are going to do some light editing, and we'll talk more about that in the video. But we are also going to, on and off, plug in and do some Facebook Live in conjunction with this video series. So we're hoping to bridge the gap a little bit to bring more people to our YouTube video as well as people onto our Facebook page. So if you haven't followed us on Facebook, make sure you do it. And reminder, if you have not yet subscribed, please subscribe. So before we go on to Facebook Live as well, I just want to talk a little bit about the editing we're going to do. As we're painting the video, or as we're painting the dragon on the video, if I don't have much to talk about, I'm going to speed up those sections where I'm not talking and just focusing on painting. The goal is to try to condense the time a little bit so that you're seeing more painting and only having to listen when I've got things to say, whether it's something creative or something just off the top of my head, or talking about the painting process or lore, the miniature itself. Otherwise, there will be parts where we'll speed it up so you can just witness the painting happening in a little bit faster time. Of course, when we prepare the video to put online, we'll call out those parts. So I'm also going to start a Facebook Live and just be ready to go. And then we will start painting our Blightfang. All right, so I believe now we're on Facebook Live as well, painting Blightfang, the Reaper Miniatures White Dragon. So we are also going to be recording this for our YouTube channel. And if you are not yet subscribed, check it out, go and subscribe. The link's a few posts down on our Facebook. But for our Blightfang, which is a white dragon miniature, size comparative, here's another miniature that we painted in videos. This is Jaw, a paladin. For one of our players, you can see a little bit of the size comparison. The jaw is on a 1-inch base, the dragon is on a 3-inch base. So quite a bit of difference. And for the dragon, we could just go through and paint it white. I've got bottles of pure white. However, we want to maintain that illusion of depth and really call out some of the details on the sculpt, so that's not what we're going to do. But I'm going to start out just with heavy coats of paint, and I shouldn't say heavy coats, multiple thinner coats of paint, and this is called just a frost giant white, and all we're going to be doing is looking at covering the miniature. So previously I did coat this in gray, and that's for two reasons. I do a lot of gray primer on my metal miniatures. This one is not a metal miniature. This is a Reaper Bones and is a plastic miniature. But I generally do gray primer on my metal miniatures, which I do for a lot of commissions and displays, anything I'm entering into contests or doing exchanges on the Reaper forums. I use metal. That's my preferred miniature material that I like to paint. So I like the metal just because it has a much better details. The sculpts and molds for metals can hold details a lot better than most of the plastics, though improvements are being made every day in the miniature community, and the detail ability for plastics is getting better and better every day. And we see that on miniatures like this, where there's just a wealth of details. So I'm starting with an off-white, and that's because we're going to shade this multiple times. And you'll see in a couple of key areas, I'm actually going to be using different colors to make it a little more dynamic. Thin that down a little bit. We want to make sure that this is nice and thin so that on these large scales, if your paint is thin enough, you won't have any brush strokes. You don't want to see any brush strokes. You want to have it nice and thin so that the details of the miniature come through. And of course, in our last video session, we painted a frost giant, another large miniature compared to most of the 28mm minis that I paint. But I do like some of the larger sculpts, and they can be a lot of fun to paint. So that's why we're doing these ones. And for the Facebook Live, if you comment, I apologize. I most likely am going to be late in replying, just because I'm not watching that screen while I'm painting. I feel like you don't want to be watching the screen while you're driving. Even though I'm using a large brush, big brush strokes covering a lot at one time, I still want to pay close attention to make sure I'm getting good coverage, getting in all the nooks and crannies, because with these big sculpts, they get a lot of detail in. So you got to make sure you've got everything covered, all the little crooks and crannies, every little spot filled up. It's just a nice, thin, even layer of paint. That's the base of the entire paint job. Just nice, thin, even layers. So on this one here, we will be doing some areas with the base coat. Instead of utilizing this white, we'll actually use some magentas as well as some pinks, because even though it's a white dragon, we want to show that it's alive and a living thing. And our eyes, when we see what's supposed to be alive, if it doesn't have some organic coloring to it, then our eyes don't perceive it as such. looks more like a statue. So blending some colors in for bases is very important. And you see a lot of the masters do that really well when they're painting. They'll start out with different tones as an underpainting. And it's just for that same reason. You want to drive in some color that is a little more organic. So for lore, white dragons, I've got a little bit of a hair there, are a chromatic dragon, an evil dragon. And as evil dragons go, they are the most bestial. Arctic temperatures, bestial. Kind of learning some of the lore really helps with some of the paint planning. And of course I do a lot of looking at different renderings and images and descriptions and things before I start a paint job so that I can get a good idea of what I want to accomplish with the paint. Just like any other type of endeavor you do, whether you're writing a book or painting on a canvas, writing a poem, even doing a doodle. Sometimes a little bit of research can go a long way. Wow, this is just such a big miniature comparatively, compared to what I'm used to. I knew it would take a bit for this initial coat to get good coverage, but my gosh, I am glad that I'm not starting with my small brush. The right tool for the right job. So this mini came unassembled, and a lot of times for large minis like this especially, it's easier to prep them, which I did, trimming all the flash lines and giving a good wash, get the mold release agents off, sand down any rough spots, have it ready to go, then to actually start painting it before assembly, just so you can get in some of those little nooks and crannies and spaces that are a little harder to get to once it's assembled. However, this is not a commission. I am not doing this for a commission. This is just for myself. So I did not want to do the separate pieces and then assemble it as far as painting. Prep work I did because I wanted to make sure that everything fit. As I was trimming, as I was getting ready, I wanted to test fit the multiple pieces. As I was taking down burrs and mold lines and doing a quick sanding. But then I just assembled it so that I could get to painting. Because for me, that's my favorite part. Wow, just such a big mini. Such a big mini. So this again is a Reaper Miniatures Mini. Majority of the minis that I paint are actually Reaper. If you've seen any of the videos, you know I talk about them quite a bit. Great company and great community. The company is getting ready to have an online expo in March. So if you're interested, I'm sure on our Facebook we have posted about it. You can find a link there. If you have not heard about it and are interested in it, don't hesitate to comment and I will reply to your comment with links. But Reaper Miniatures Spring Expo in March, the 5th, I believe. It'll last a weekend. They've got different types of miniature classes for different painting techniques and basing techniques and sculpting techniques, and some of their master painters do some of the classes. Lots of fun contests and competitions that they do during the expo. Again, just a fantastic community. If you're interested and don't have the link and can't find it on my previous posts, just leave a comment and I will reply to your comment with links. They just did their Reaper Bones 5 Kickstarter, so it's their 5th Kickstarter they did for miniatures. And I believe that pledge now is closed. If you are interested, I imagine in the fall they will be doing another Kickstarter. Their Kickstarters are great as far as the prices are amazing when you're a backer for the amount of miniatures that they produce and that you get shipped. It's just a heck of a deal. So white dragons, I was hoping to be a little bit further on the base coat on this. White dragons, as I said, for the mythology of them, Arctic climates. They, instead of breathing fire, they breathe cold, like cones of cold. So think of a blizzard. Anybody in my family who's from South Dakota, Wyoming, Minnesota, you know what that's like. Instead of breathing fire at you, they breathe a blizzard at you. No fun. No fun at all. But for dragons in the fantasy genre, of course there are all different types of dragons. And if you can think of it, they've got a dragon for it. White dragons, as a gamer, I have not gotten to use a whole ton. In one of the campaigns that I'm running, the party went into an area where there was a white dragon that was terrorizing everybody, and that was the whole reason I bought this miniature, was just for that campaign encounter. partially COVID, and a move did not help much. But I was not able to get this miniature completed to be able to use in that game. So now it's time I get it done. And for this here, again, just a fast, thin coat. I'm working very fast on this base coat just because I don't want the paints to dry before I can put them on. If they dry, then they're going to be too thick, and you're going to have a lot of brush strokes in them. Brush strokes are the enemy, because it's harder to get them out. There is a lot of opportunity to really paint these dragons however you like to. If you were to purchase this one, for instance, and you didn't want it to be a white dragon, nothing wrong with painting it a different color. Nothing wrong with that at all. It's your dragon. It's your dragon, and you can do whatever you want with it. Nothing set in stone. The fun thing about painting miniatures is you get to make it your own. You get to put your own stamp on it. Have it anything you want. There's something that's really nice about that. Really rewarding. Of course, it is always nice too to paint things kind of how they're used, whether it's in real life or even for fantasy gaming, sci-fi gaming, whatever you like. But free to be creative as you want. That's also nice too if you happen to make any type of a mistake. Just tell everybody that's what you meant to do. Who are they to say anything, because it's fantasy. And you are free to change things as you see fit. Sometimes it's good too if you can find a way to reuse something. If instead of being able to use this as an Arctic, I needed to use it for something else, I just painted a different color and moved right along. And instead of having a white dragon named Blightfang, I could have any dragon I wanted. I could make it a red dragon or blue dragon. Doesn't matter. And if you can see, I know that light is a little harsh on the Facebook Live video. But I'm leaving a couple of select areas unpainted. And that is because we're going to go in and lay down some other colors in those areas. And then in some of the areas, I'm going kind of with the scales, and in others, I'm going against the scales. There again, that's just so I have good, even coverage and get in all the little nooks and crannies. As they sculpt these, they put in a lot of detail. On these larger minis, they have a lot of room to put in a lot of detail. once we get this white laid down. We'll give it a minute to dry. And check for comments on the Facebook Live. And reply to those comments while it's drying. And then depending on how much time we've eaten up, that may be all we get to on the Facebook Live. We'll see. So my goal is to be able to have some good interaction with people on Facebook, as well as posting the videos onto YouTube. So the primary camera is going to be my YouTube camera because it does a bird's eye view. And we try to get it to get a good bird's eye view. It's a little challenging with a mini this big. But when we're using nice thin paints, it's not that bad. And just going through and making sure inside all those scales I've got good coverage. Give it a good once over and just look and see, is there anywhere we missed? Because as that paint dries too, it's going to pull back a little bit because we've thinned it on our wet palette. So you've got to make sure as it pulls back a little bit, any of those little areas get repainted. And if you missed anything, I have a couple areas where I missed something. So for me, these larger minis are a lot more challenging. So this is a good way to challenge myself to paint more often and jump out of my own comfort zone by painting things that I'm not as comfortable with. Because the only way you can get better is if you challenge yourself. If you just do the same thing over and over and over again, I guarantee you'll get better at that. But then you're not improving yourself beyond that point. All right, we've got that. I'll let that sit for a second. Make sure it gets nice and dry. Let's check. Well, it doesn't look like any comments there, so that's okay. So while that's drying, give a quick update on the Frost Giant. So we just finished painting a Frost Giant. That is another Reaper. What we've done is gone through and worked on the base. So it was sitting on a very slick, smooth plastic base that I had purchased separately. I've gone through and put a little bit of it's a plaster fabric used for terrain building. I super glued some of that down onto the base so that it is adhered really well, because that smooth, slick base, very hard for terrain building. So after that, then I just built up some of that with a touch of gray stuff and actually just some paper towel, and got it all adhered and glued together, and then coated it with a very thinned PVA glue, and then just covered it in dirt. One of the best basic materials you can find free everywhere is just a little bit of dirt. After that dries, we'll paint it. We'll do a lot of different terrain building and be good to go. So in our white dragon, we're going to start popping in for basing a couple of other different tones. So this is where I'm going to swap things up a little bit and make sure my white brush is nice and clean, though I'm not going to use that because it's such a big bulky brush. I'm going to use it for wings here in a little bit. But the next color I'm going to do is going to be a pink. And this is just Reaper's Breast Cancer Awareness Pink. Fantastic paint, as well as a fantastic cause. So, oh my gosh. That one is just a little too heavy. Okay. So we'll get our pink. And I'm just going to be laying this right in the mouth. So this is not thinned down, just right out of the bottle. Of course, he's got these massive teeth in here. It's going to be a little challenging to get the paint down in there with this brush. So we may have to go back in with an even finer tipped brush so we can get into the little crevices there. This is all base coating, so it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be super pretty. Accuracy of the color is the most important thing. Getting a good base tone laid in the right areas as we go through and paint. We'll get that all cleaned up, layer by layer. So it does not need to be perfectly accurate in the application. Just close. You need to get it to the right spot for that base color. So here in the mouth, pink mouth. And that's super bright. It's almost make Don Johnson jealous. It's so white and pink. It looks that way anyhow. But I assure you it's not. And then next, I'm going to be grabbing some magenta and a little bit more of this than I did the pink. Right onto my wet palette. And these multiple colors are good because as we paint the different areas, it allows that former paint to dry. Because you want to paint over dry paint. And this one here, I'm going to switch brushes again. And this magenta, I'll start to see why I left some blank areas. As I go through, I'm going to put some of this in some of these areas where you see some almost fleshy details merge in with scaly details. So he's got this fin on the back of his head. We're going to lay some magenta in there. And more of it along the base than the top. When we get into painting those details, I'll tell you why. And then I'm going to do some actually around the eyes. Again, this is, you would think, very counterproductive, and in many ways it is, because if you're looking at a color wheel, you know, white is a cold color, blue is a cold color. This is an Arctic creature, so you've got to be thinking cold. Reds are warm colors, so utilizing these magentas and pinks is kind of funky in theory, and you would be right, because this is supposed to be an Arctic creature. So why would we be adding magentas and pinks, and then down the road touches of green? It seems very counterproductive to what we're going for with a white dragon. So now we're just putting some of this magenta in bands down the neck. Looking at where the scales kind of meet or separate. Meet, I guess, is the better descriptor. So why would we lay down warm colors on this Arctic creature? Comment your thoughts on why we would. And or reply with whether or not you're correct. Fortunately, I don't have a prize to give you if you're correct. However, I'll acknowledge that you're correct. And just a couple of areas where we put this warm color, kind of behind the legs. And maybe just a couple in crevices on the chest. Not a ton, but a few of them. I'm looking for where it's like most flexed. Where are those panels on his chest most open and flexed? Now, a lot of this is going to get covered up, so it's not going to look exactly the same. And then I did not paint any on the wings for the same reason. I'm going to lay down a base in select areas with this magenta. And it's kind of haphazard. It may look very haphazard. That's okay. Again, I'm doing a base coat. This is a rough base coat. So I'm not looking for precision and accuracy in the painting. I'm looking for putting things in the right location, roughly, fast, and thin. Get a little hair there. And of course, the whole time I'm painting this, I'm trying not to touch it. I don't want to touch the mini, because if I do, I'm going to be rubbing off paint that I just put down. I want to avoid that. And just laying some color down. After this step here, we're going to pause this video. That's going to be it for this first video. If you are on the YouTube, you're going to get a little nugget of information here shortly. If you're watching on Facebook Live, you're going to miss out on a little detail that I'm going to provide on YouTube. Because for us, that's where we're stopping for right now for this segment. Blightfang, the white dragon, that we've used white, an off-white, pink, and magenta in very rough, patchy ways. So Facebook Live, I'm signing off. And excuse me. If you are watching us on YouTube, you get a little extra that Facebook Live does not. So if you see, I'm going to lay down a little bit more magenta on the top. This is only going to come into play in the final paint. On top of this, we're going to do more white. We're going to cover the wings with white. Everywhere it's gray, we're going to cover with white. However, I want to lay these magenta pieces down so that they get subdued with that white. I want to do that so that the white actually tones this down and pushes it into the wing visually. Visually pushes it into the wing. I want it to be beneath the white. This magenta that's on the top, as well as the lower. The magenta of the wing is going to be pushed in on both the upper and the lower. Now I'm not doing as much up here compared to the bottom. I did in between all of those. And the reason I'm not doing as much up here, well, it's not quite dry, is because I want the underside to look thinner or meatier. So not meatier, I guess, more skin-like, where the upper is going to be a little thicker, a little more protected. Even though it's all kind of fleshy, I want you to think of it like a bug, where the upper part is protected with almost a shell, a thicker part, and the lower part under the wing, the underneath side, is a little fleshier. So just adding a touch more. I want that really to opaque up over that gray. And again, this is just a super quick, fast undercoating that I'm doing here. So I'm not looking for perfection. I'm not being super, I guess, careful with where I'm laying the paints. I'm not being very accurate and clean, but that's by design. Because this is going to be covered up in multiple layers, I just need the pigments placed in the right area and to the right opaqueness. And that is all. And that's where we've got Blightfang. I guarantee you it is not going to look like that when it's done. This is undercoating and base painting. Stick with the video and watch this turn into a magnificent, realistic looking white dragon. We'll see you next time.